Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephanie Strom, Jonathan Bloom, Dana Gunders, Doug Rauch.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Strom. I cover what I call the business of food at the New York Times, which ranges from everything from agriculture to fast food to food policy, you name it. 4 people used to cover this beat, which tells you a little bit what's happened to the news industry. So I have been thinking for the last month or so about what it means that my employer assigned me to moderate the panel about trash. And I'm gonna try to get all of you involved a little bit here. How many of you at breakfast this morning left something on your plate? Raise hands. I don't think everybody's being honest. Come on. So we're here to talk about that very issue, the food that we waste. And when we talk about food waste, which is the term of art, although I think Doug is going to try to persuade you differently, that is used, we're not talking about those turkey sphincters you heard about a little bit earlier. We're actually talking about the food that gets thrown away when people only eat half of what's on their plate in the restaurant. When people look at, like my husband looks at the sell-by date on milk and says, it's a day old, throw it away, right? So I'm not the expert on this. I'm going to let our panelists do most of the talking. We have a great panel here. Dana Gunders, down here at this end, is a scientist at the National Resources Defense Council, where she comes up with market solutions and policies that promote sustainability. She is also the author of this very well-loved report, as you can see, called Wasted: How America is Losing Up to 40% of its Food from Farm to Fork to Landfill. And it is absolutely something that the government should have done a long time ago, but stopped doing it in like 1997, right? And it will tell you a lot about the issue and about the numbers behind the issue. She's also, this spring, going to come out with a new book called The Guide to a Waste-Free Kitchen. And I encourage you all to have a look at it. Doug Rauch here is a veteran of Trader Joe's, where he developed the company's private label program, which I think accounts for like 85% of the products on the shelves now, right? Yeah. And he's graduated from Trader Joe's and is now making mischief with a new retail concept called the Daily Table, which is going to open in Dorchester sometime next year. The Daily Table is going to sell blemished foods, excess foods, foods a little bit past their sell-by date, and he's raised a lot of eyebrows and hackles with this, so we're all looking forward to seeing it actually happen. And then last but not least is Jonathan Bloom, who is a journalist and consultant. He's behind the blog Wasted Food. Jonathan has worked with the UN Food and Agriculture Organization on this issue, as well as august places like Harvard Law School. And he has probably done more than anybody to educate our college and university students about food waste and the issues that it raises. So with that said, I'm going to have Dana sort of set the stage and tell us what are we talking about when we talk about food waste? How big a problem is it and why?
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, I think, and I apologize that I'm getting over a cold, so you may observe the results of that. We've talked so much about sustainable food already and how much goes into growing it and how challenging it is to grow it. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that no matter how sustainably we grow food and organically, beyond organically, if we're not eating that food in the end, it's not a good use of those resources. Whether they be the water and the fertilizer or the people's time that went into it. And yet, in this country right now, about 40% of all the food is actually ultimately not being eaten. And that's true whether you look at it from a caloric perspective or whether you're looking at it from a weight perspective. You actually wind up with about the same numbers, which are very loose because we haven't really looked at this very much in the US. We have not really prioritized it, so we have terrible data. So every number that we pretty much cite up here is, a good estimate of a guess. With that, when you consider the staggering amount of resources that are going into this food, it's really jaw-dropping. I live in California. You've all heard about the drought there. It's estimated that 25% of all the water in this country is going to grow food that ultimately never gets eaten. And when you look at, we've talked about greenhouse gases, 33 million passenger cars worth of greenhouse gases every year. Or put another way, by the UN FAO last year, if greenhouse gases were, if food waste were a country, it would be number 3 in terms of its greenhouse gas footprint after the US and China. It's the number 1 product going into landfills today in the US. And there's also a huge amount of labor that's going into that food that I think is really important not to forget about, time and care and love that's going into it as well. It's a very it's a moral tragedy, really, when you think about all the food insecurity in this country. And I won't go over their statistics because I know we've gone over them before. But I will tell you that our estimate is that if we were to reduce the amount of food losses in this country by 30%, it would be enough to feed all 50 million food insecure Americans their complete diet. And most of them don't need a complete diet. They need kind of supplemental assistance. Now, whether those are the best calories, that's up for discussion. But certainly, a lot of the best calories are what's going to waste. It is the perishable foods, your fresh foods, that typically do get wasted. It's also, to a certain extent, foods that require more resources than others. So a lot of dairy goes to waste. And not all food that gets wasted is really equal. When you think about throwing out a hamburger, you're throwing out all those glasses of chocolate syrup that Michael Mullen poured out this morning, What I typically say is that when you throw out a hamburger, it's the equivalent of throwing out a 90-minute shower's worth of water. Whereas when you throw out an apple, it's more like a 7-minute shower. So I think when we talk about sort of where do we focus, focusing on those nutritionally dense and resource intensive products is important.
So Doug, tell us a little bit about what we could do with this food. We've heard it has an environmental impact, which we see, right?
Yep.
So does it have another impact in terms of feeding people?
Well, yeah, as you know, I have a little bit of passion around, having spent 35 years in the food industry, and from grower through retail, watching, food not get utilized. At the same time, as we know, there's 1 in 6 Americans, as Dana's mentioned, almost 50 million, that are struggling economically to get the nutrition they need. And this has been mentioned many times, from starting with Mark's great opening keynote all the way through. We've talked about this. So the first thing is, I'd like to ask you, how many of you in the audience would like to have a second helping of food waste? And there is part of our problem. Part of the problem is when we characterize this product as waste, we right away define it as something that's a sanitary issue or an issue of what type of waste is it. It's waste from food, but it's still waste. And I'd like us to, basically in marketing, journalists, et cetera, flip those 2 words and start talking about wasted food. Because then what you're talking about is, what type of food is it? It's food we've wasted. And only when we have that mindset do you really begin to grapple with and understand what most of this food is. And most of this food is wholesome, healthy, excess. It might be cosmetically blemished. It might be, I was on a panel in March down in D.C. for Partnership for a Better America, or Healthier America. And it was called Feed Families, Not Landfills. And one of the gentlemen was there, put up a slide of a lettuce field in Salinas Valley. And those of you who are growers in the industry, you'll understand what this is going. And it was a picture, you'd see some holes in the lettuce, but otherwise it was a green field. And he said, the interesting thing about this slide is this is a slide after the harvest. And the only thing wrong with that lettuce that's out there is it was too large or too small for the bag, because this particular crop was grown. Their customer was putting lettuce, as we know, either 3 romaine or sometimes you have the clamshell for other styles of lettuce. So in this particular instance, this field was about to get plowed under. And when we think about this, clearly that's not food waste in the sense it's waste. This is lettuce. It was too large or too small. So in my opinion, I think first we have to do is start to recognize this is wasted food. Second is that I really do believe we have an opportunity to put these two together, to take the challenge and issue, which we've talked a lot about, over the environmental impact of all of this wasted food and our agricultural practices and processes, and utilize it to solve another problem, which is the fact that, right or wrong, and it's not manufacturers, it's not farmers, it's not retailers that are gouging and creating expensive nutrients. The entire system, from the Farm Bill on up, is geared for cheap calories and expensive nutrients. And as a result, what we have is we have these 1 in 6 that are struggling to get affordable nutrition. It's not so much food deserts, it's access to something they can afford that they should be eating. And I think that Daily Table, as just an example, and there are many innovative and wonderful ideas on this, Daily Table's idea is to take this food, not just come down and sell food that's past its display code date, but also then cook up in the back and create ready-to-grab-and-go meals, because it turns out that most people that are economically challenged are also challenged in time and challenged in knowledge about how to cook.
So would you be, those lettuces you were just talking about,
Yep.
would that be something that would get sold at Daily Table?
Well,
Or could-
or there are, California's doing a great job. There's people that Crop Mobster, and Nick, who I think has recently just left Crop Mobster, but was helping coordinate growers and food banks. There's a bunch of other people, Food Cowboy, the people that do the trucking and these sorts of things. There's a lot of innovative things. So the instance of Daily Table, yes, we're actually looking at gleaning and have gleaned, even though the store hasn't opened yet. It'll open end of February into March, thanks to IRS's wonderful long delays, that we've already gleaned 20,000 pounds of product, and just through connections with one of the farmers here today, we're hoping tomorrow to glean a bunch more product. That's the sort of stuff that is the wasted food that should be used for nutrition for those that are less fortunate.
Okay. Jonathan, could you tell us where this wasted food is coming from? Who's responsible, in other words?
Sure. And first off, just a quick thank you to the New York Times Foundation and Stone Barns for having this panel here. It's really exciting for food waste to actually have a place at the table, literally and figuratively.
Wasted food?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Wasted food now has a place at the table, and especially right before lunch, which is always exciting to see how you all respond to this message and put it into practice. But anyhow, so we're wasting all this food, roughly 40% of what's available for production or for consumption. And so where's that happening? The short answer is everywhere. All throughout the food chain, food is being lost. The slightly more nuanced answer is that the 2 largest sources of waste come from farms and households. And so there's good and bad news there. The good news is that we as individuals can actually have a role in remedying the problem. The slightly less good news is that we as individuals are fairly wasteful. And I would say that to back it up a step, we don't have perfect data, as Dana mentioned, on exactly how much is lost at each step of the food chain. So these are estimates. But all that to say, or that's another way of saying that we need better data and that the USDA could do a better job of actually pinpointing where in the food chain the loss is happening. And we've seen that in the UK, where there's been investment at the federal level, and government has helped fund studies that's providing this fabulous data on how much is being lost where. And then there have been campaigns using that data that have spread the message, and the media has certainly been on board. And it's achieved success, and household waste has diminished by close to 20% in a 5-year span because that message was out there and it was laden with data points and not just the estimates that we'll provide you today.
So how much awareness is there? And where is it? Are farmers aware that they're one of the biggest sources of food loss? Is my neighbor next door aware that she's such a big source of food loss? And why don't they know if they don't know, and how do they know if they do know?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And certainly the loss varies from different crop to different crop. So primarily, as Dana mentioned, it's the more perishable foods that are being lost at higher rates. And in particular, on the farm level, it's fruits and vegetables, which are extremely hard to capture at the right time. And part of that gets into the nature of how we're harvesting that. It also leads to some policy questions on things such as immigration and the labor force available to harvest certain crops at certain times. And as that diminishes, maybe you used to have a roving crop of pickers come through 3 times per year. But now, because of availability and pricing, you'll just have a crew come through once, and they'll pick whatever's ready at that point and leave a whole lot of perfectly edible, in the future, lettuce in the field, as Doug had alluded to earlier.
But, I mean, on that awareness question, I would say that farmers are far more aware of what's going to waste on their farm than we are. I mean, how much?
Because it's dollars and cents, right?
Yeah, I mean, they would love to be selling that lettuce. They know it's out there. It's just sort of the cost of doing business at this point, and it's wrapped into the cost of what they are selling. How much did you waste last week? You know, we don't know. Nobody's measuring it. Nobody pays attention, and it happens in such kind of here and there in little bits. It's really not on our radar as people out there in the world, whether we're in our homes, cleaning out our fridge, or at a restaurant, or when we're ordering and we're hungry and we order like 3 appetizers and dinner comes and then we're full.
Right.
Yeah, and we're also part of the problem because we demand this perfect-looking produce. And so a lot of that waste on the farm is not through the fault of the growers by any means, but they know that they can't sell anything that's the wrong shape, size, or color. And God forbid it has a small blemish on it, that's going to be plowed under. And so, obviously the fresh market demands certain things, but we as consumers can have a role in shifting what that demand looks like and communicating to sellers of food and the retail markets that we're fine with something that might be 3 inches instead of 4 inches.
So we need an advertising campaign. Love those ugly tomatoes.
Well, yeah, I mean they're very hot these days. There was a neat campaign in France called
Intermarché.
Yeah, Intermarché, a supermarket in France, did this campaign called Inglorious Fruits and Vegetables, and now it's been very popular. And now the ugly fruit and veggies are now celebrated.
Okay.
And I should mention, it's interesting because one of the challenges we face is that in my lifetime, the cost of food's dropped almost in half. Since I started with Trader Joe's in the 70s, it's down a full third. So as a result, what's happened is both for us as the end user, but also then just the economic calculation that's done by retailers and down through the chain is that labor is often more expensive than the food. And so instead of putting more labor to go out and harvest many times in a lettuce field, the labor was more expensive than the actual lettuce was. And we in our homes end up paying so much less that food becomes something. It isn't a valuable, precious resource. The gift that it is. We've heard about all what's happening in the water and all these precious resources we're utilizing. So one is I think that we have just naturally economically devalued it from previous generations. The other side is that I know from the retail end that if you have a store that is out of product at 8 o'clock at night and you close at 9, customers aren't happy. And not only are they not happy, they'll tell you that I'm going elsewhere if you don't remedy this quick. So to some degree, we, as the customer, are responsible for relatively high levels of food that at the end of that day, if you got to be fully in stock till the moment you close, you're almost by definition ending up with, and this isn't just retail, this is also food service. You got to have something that looks full and fresh and have everything on the menu available. You just end up with an unrealistic situation.
Well, just to push on that a tiny bit, I mean, do you think that could change? Because I see that as a driver of waste, not just in supermarkets, but in, say, buffet restaurants, or even in supermarkets with the salad bar. And there's this idea that at 8:59 it has to be a completely filled salad bar, but at 9:01 it's trash. And maybe there's some room for change there. Maybe we as consumers can expect things to work a little bit differently. And so if you dally upstairs and lunch is supposed to end at 2 o'clock, and you show up at, 1:55, maybe they won't have the selection that you would expect. But that gets into some issues of what is hospitality. And
that gets back to what Ron was talking about the marketplace. I think to some degree, we can't just point to others and you've talked quite a bit about this, Jonathan, in the past, is that, we as the end user have to take responsibility, not just for techniques and great ideas about how we can be more thoughtful and reduce our own, but also our expectations when we're going out in the marketplace and let the people know that, hey, if you got this, in the same way if we go to a restaurant and they end up giving you far more than you could possibly eat, then in one way you go, oh, this is really cool, I got this real value and I'll take it home. But so many times you're not heading home, or you're traveling, or you're something else, and it's just waste. The same way if we push back on that in the marketplace, I would say that you go to Europe, as you know, it's not, I remember the first time I went to Marks & Spencer back in the 80s, and I walked in the stores about 5:30 or 6 in the afternoon, and it looked like they were doing a remodel. It looked like it was completely gutted. And I walked up to someone and said, wow, well, what's going on? He said, what do you mean? I said, like literally, there was like 40 feet with nothing on it practically. And he said, oh, well, come on back tomorrow morning. I did, and the place was beautiful. And
well,
I just went, wow.
It's kind of interesting, right? We think of scarcity as being prized. If you try to get a restaurant reservation 2 days in advance in New York City, you can't get it, and that's because it's really prized, right? So maybe we need to start thinking about apples and bananas and lettuce the same way. Get to the store early to get your good produce. So this, though, brings up something that I have to ask about. So we're talking about, perhaps leaving the salad bar overnight or whatever, right? What about food safety in all of this? And maybe talk to me about food safety, and then let's talk about this thing called the dating game. So first, food safety. Doug, Dana, you guys want to talk about this?
I'll just cue Dana. Dana and Harvard did a wonderful, wonderful service to all of us with this report called The Dating Game. And it's something which I know from the retail end that 99% of customers don't know about code dates and display codes.
These are the dates that are like sell by, use by.
When I started in the industry, they used to not be open codes. They used to be a closed code. It'd be like JV227. It'd be a Julian calendar date or something like that mixed around. And we've gone to almost all, even honey now has a best by date.
Transparency.
So, but food safety, I think we all would agree, is a prime directive is, it first and foremost has to be safe. The challenge is, and Dana and Jonathan probably talk about this with much more, I'm slightly unburdened by facts, and hence they're here. And that is that what I do know is from the retail end that food safety issues almost never ever are related to code dates. They're about safe handling practices. They're about, that E. coli was there from the moment it was packed, or salmonella, listeriosis, all this other stuff is not about, it's 2 days past its display code. So I think that's one issue, is that there's a misnomer like, it's not, that milk's a day past its sell-by date. I don't know if it's safe. Well, the issues that would make, most harm, they would have been there when it was packed or not.
So are sell-by dates, who are they mandated? Are they required? Who sets them? How do they happen?
First, I'd like to ask everyone who's ever thrown something out on the date.
Be honest.
I know, yeah, can't see that well.
Wow, what an educated.
But
group.
apparently we're below average here because across the country, according to a study by the retail industry, 9 out of 10 consumers have at least occasionally throw products out on the sell-by date to be sure that it's safe, for concerns out of safety. Now, there's different words used. There's sell-by, there's use-by, there's best-by. In theory, sell-by should mean something different than use-by or best-by. It's kind of in a different bucket. It's like a B2B information that's telling the manufacturer telling the store, you sell this product by this date, and your consumer's going to get it home and have a week or some reasonable amount of shelf life for it to be at its best quality. And then it'll hit its use-by period, which, or use-by or best-by or anything, are not federally regulated. The only product that has a federally regulated date is infant formula. They're not even meant to indicate safety. So if you go ask your manufacturer or you look at the USDA site, they're considered to be manufacturer suggestions for when the products are at their peak quality or at their freshest. And it's kind of the brand telling you, we're going to stand by our brand until this date. But not at all related to safety. And they were never meant to be. They came, before the 70s, there were no dates. Mm-hmm. And people still survived.
I'm here because of that.
And they came out of a demand to know how fresh product was, but not out of a guarantee for safety. And so there's this sort of mass misconception out there, even by people who ignore those dates. They're like, I know better, but they still often believe that the date is supposed to be telling them about safety.
And
do we throw fruits and vegetables away faster than we should because they look a little off? Those strawberries, look a little.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, that's great fodder for a smoothie or any kind of thing you're cooking if it's a vegetable. But I would add, just as we were talking about the semantics and the terminology, the very term expiration date, the real misnomer, and that leads to so many problems. And last I checked, food doesn't suddenly die at midnight on the date stamped on the package. There's a spectrum of
and there are some
edibility.
foods that live long afterwards.
Well, exactly.
For a variety of
any
reasons.
brewer or creator of sauerkraut would know that.
So we only have a few minutes before I'm going to ask all of you to participate and ask questions, and I do mean that. I'd like you to participate. Your favorite example, one example from each of you of something that's being done to cut food waste, to help people, consumers, or retail operations, or restaurants cut their waste. Jonathan, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. I'm going to cheat and give you two, but I'm going to
Okay.
do it really quickly. Okay, so I think the two areas we need to focus on most are getting the most nutritious food recovered and then pushing food recovery and avoiding waste in schools. Mm-hmm. Okay, so on the nutritious food front, there's a whole lot of food that isn't used in the fields. And so getting out into the farm areas and gleaning is a fabulous way to get some of those healthier foods to people who need it. But calling on volunteers to do that is hard, and that limits what you actually get. So there's a neat opportunity in Coachella Valley. There's a group called Hidden Harvest, and what they're doing is actually paying low-income farm workers to go out and pick food that's then donated. So what they're doing is solving that problem of the unused farm food, getting it into food banks and soup kitchens in their area. Then on the school front, there's a group called Food Bus in Northern Virginia that's based there. And what they're doing is helping schools recover food that is not eaten in the lunchroom scenario, but is perfectly edible. So it's whole fruits and, in many cases, milks, where you're being asked to take one as part of the school lunch program. And even if you might not want it, you got to take it. And so they're facilitating that redistribution of healthy foods and pushing the awareness in the school setting.
Great. All right, Dana, Doug, who wants to go first?
Well, I'll stick on the fruit and vegetable theme because we've talked about that some. There's a food service company called Bon Appetit Management Company. They're a a subsidiary of Compass Group. And they have sort of recently, a lot of people hear about this. Wow, we did a survey saying that somewhere between 2 and 30% of fruits and vegetables are not making it off farm. And some of that is this cosmetic imperfection challenge. And they said, wait, that's cheap produce we could be getting. And so they've actually tried to put that into place. They're in the middle of their first pilot of this, but they're going out to some of their existing growers that they buy from and asking them kind of what are you not selling, and trying to buy some of that and use it in their stores. And first signs show it to be really successful. Cool. So that's exciting. And just to give you a sense, like one of the peach growers I talked to about this said he throws away 200 in the middle of the season. He's a big grower, 200,000 pounds a week of stone fruit. And he sends as much as he can to the local food bank, but they can't take, what are they gonna do with that much stone fruit? And he says, if you were to come look at these peaches, you would not be able to tell me what's wrong with 8 out of 10 of them. So it's good stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I think even at Bon Appetit, don't they reward people? Like they challenge the chef, use the shoulders of the strawberry or else, and then he gets a little bonus for it. It's really, they've come up with some interesting things. All right, Doug.
All right, so let's see. So I'll have to.
But you can't talk about your own operation.
Are you sure?
Yes.
It's really innovative. Okay, but so I'll go a different way, and that is that there's a lot of innovation going on around smartphone technology and the internet stuff. Just a case in point, up at Sloan School, they've got a kid that's 2 people that were in the Sloan School that came up with spoiler alert. And what it does is it matches up everything from the end user customer with a store that has just some stuff running out, and they got dynamic pricing, to growers and food banks. So it's a broad base, both kind of B2B and also then end user,
B2C.
of which there are B2C, of which then there are several like that. There's other ones that are, some are for-profit, some are non-profit. One that is like that, but different, just to show the spectrum of what can be here. In Germany, they have food share, I think it's called, which is where there's 3 steps. And what you do is, if you've got food, for instance, that you had a party and you got stuff left over, you don't know what to do with it, you go off on this, and your neighbors can go in like, oh, I could use that, or I can use that, or you're about to go away and you've got product in your fridge. Well, come on by and, or I need 2 eggs for this. And it's this sort of crowdsourcing.
It's online?
And it's online. It's you sign up, and it's mostly in cities and areas. If you go to FoodShare and DE, I think, and that it's just, this is just as an example of some really interesting, innovative ways in which people are starting to tackle this and try and match up excess supply with possible demand.
All right, my question system here is not working very well, but you guys don't get off the hook. You have to ask questions. So I'm going to do what Michael did, and people can raise their hands. Okay, there's one back there. Can we get a mic over there?
This is for Doug. How do you plan to get over the considerable hump of you're selling food that other people or groceries didn't want? How do people feel about that? And what's taken so long? You said you had IRS issues, but were there other hurdles that you had in the PR realm?
Well, okay, first of all, absolutely. If you go down and say, hey, listen, I'd like to sell you some people's trash, are you interested? The answer is no. When you start to talk about, how many of you shop at TJ Maxx? What do you feel about buying expired clothing? How about clothing waste? And it reframes it in the same way wasted food compared to food waste. So I've gone down maybe, I don't know how many times, 10, 15 times for neighborhood, everything from 150 people to 20 groups, whether it's church groups or neighborhood groups, in Dorchester. And through conversation, they're now excited. They're looking forward to it. And so, yes, there is a reframing that all of us have to do around this issue. But it turns out that there's a real need, that affordability of food, that they know that there's a healthcare tsunami that's already starting to hit them, that we're going to feel as a society if we continue to allow basically diabetes and obesity and heart disease occur. So I think that so there is a marketing issue with this. We're working on it. We think that by getting out into the neighborhood, by hiring from the neighborhood, by having people come watch, the store itself, the way it's being designed, has a large 8-foot window where you get to watch people actually cook and prepare. The other side of it is, it turned out that if you back into it, that this poverty of time means that we're going to have the grab-and-go meals prepared for you, means that also they're all freshly coded. It's not out of code. So we're just simply gleaning product, taking it in the back, preparing that, and then having it be costed agnostically to junk food. So as a nonprofit, our mission is to have people that are already buying food, which is the vast majority of these 49 million, but can't afford to buy nutritious food, give them something they can afford that will nudge them and actually move them in a healthy direction. Well, so we will be selling also other products that are past their display code. We definitely, and I promise to the community, I will not sell anything expired. If it's dead food, I don't want us to carry it either. So, if your dog expired, your credit card expired, I won't be doing that either. So I think that, it is, as you can see, it's a positioning challenge. The interesting thing, I'll just say this very, very quickly on it, because I think it's part of the positioning challenge. We're an elite group in this room. And when I talk to my neighbors in a nice community in Newton, many of them say, well, wait a minute, you're going to go around and collect from farmers and retailers and this wholesome, healthy, food that's about to be wasted, but you're getting it, collecting it, now you're going to bring it down to a retail store and you're going to sell it? Well, that feels kind of funny. Why don't you just give it away? And it turns out the one missing element that most of us don't understand is dignity. So not once in 3.5 years of going down into the community and talking to neighborhood after neighborhood group has anyone ever said, how come you're not giving this to us? So dignity is a key issue. And then the second part is that the economics of it actually work out such that we hope to be sustainable. Because if we can compete with junk food, provide a customer shopping experience that's dignified, then what we're going to end up with is actually something that's scalable. Because funder fatigue is real. No one wants to keep funding any nonprofit where there is no light at the end of the tunnel, and that if, by the way, if it's 1x for one store and it's 100x for 100, not very attractive.
So you're going to have a dollar menu?
So we're not, well, it's not going to be quite like that, but what we did do is we actually got 2 different interns, the one by Williams College, the other one from a foundation in Connecticut from Organic Farm that gave us someone for a year, that has really gone out and studied, okay, you're in this community. What are you buying now? What are the calories? What did it cost? How much volume is it? If we're going to be true to our mission, and we're going to give you something that's as filling and as satisfying but be nutritious and be the same or lower in price, we got to know what that is. So we've got a really good mapping now of exactly what's being consumed. And it turns out, big surprise to me, and I actually think Mark wrote about this years ago, fast food isn't cheap.
No.
Junk food and fast food, it turns out, isn't that cheap in many ways.
Over here? This lady sitting here on the, thanks.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask you about the statement that we hear enough that we already grow enough food to feed the world, particularly in conversations around feeding the world by 2050. I work with an organization that works with hungry farmers in East Africa. They are farmers who are literally hungry, experiencing an annual hunger season for about 6 months out of the year in between harvests. And when I think about that statement, having been a spokeswoman who has made that statement in the past, I'm struggling with that now, and I wanted to hear your perspective on that because it seems to imply a mass model of redistribution that is not realistic, particularly when we talk about an international context. And I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, certainly the hunger issue is central to the food waste issue, and they're related. It's morally callous to create as much waste as we have over here and then have as many hungry people as we have. And so whether you're looking at the food system as a domestic one or internationally, it's the same problem where we're overproducing, impacting the planet, as we've talked about much today, and to what effect? To produce this excess that we either overeat here, we don't use here, or we ship abroad as food aid. And increasingly, I'm seeing problems with that system and the undercutting of the small farmers overseas because we're just putting this glut of food on that global scale in those smaller countries and making it harder for the smallholder farmers to compete. And so I think we need to rethink how we approach our food system domestically and globally. Certainly, for those of us in this room, it's easier to do the latter and think about what we as Americans can do, and hopefully policy can be part of the solution. But it certainly won't be easy, and just because we can say we have enough food to feed all the hungry people in America or on the planet doesn't make it easy to pull it off. And so, yeah, I think that's where we are now, trying to access as many ideas for redistribution as possible, and then think about maybe even before that overproduction happens, wiser agricultural policies, maybe getting away from that fence row to fence row agricultural strategy, which came about in the 1970s when we were trying to outgrow the Soviet Union, which seems a little bit outdated to me at this point.
Well, given what's happening in Russia, maybe not.
That's up for debate, I suppose.
Yeah. So here? Get over here too. Thanks.
Hi, Doug. I have a question for you. My name is Michelle, and I'm representing Unilever, so a big global manufacturer. And, I deal with this every day in my job where we have our factories maybe producing too much and our supply outpacing our demand. And I see that there's an opportunity to kind of nationalize what you're doing. And I'm just wondering, are you working with, the Walmarts or the Unilevers or the large scale people that can maybe help take your idea and bring what you're doing collectively, like the neighborhoods and the organizations that you're working with on a regional basis, but really to nationalize it in a way that can make that ripple effect so much bigger?
Well, it's a great question, Michelle. And I think that, first of all, I had the pleasure of meeting Paul Pullman, and he came to an event. I'm CEO of Conscious Capitalism. He came to an event a couple weeks ago. And to talk to him and to listen to his passion around hunger is really inspiring. So just props to Unilever for all the work that I think you're really doing and how important that is at core. And it comes from the top. Listening to the CEO talk passionately about this, I think is important. So, my vision is, the nice thing about being a nonprofit is you don't worry about your IP. So I'd love to wake up tomorrow and find out that Walmart embraced this and the problem's solved. Whether that happens, and until that happens, the rest of us need to figure out ways to do that. Now, one of the things that happens in the nonprofit world is that, just as in the for-profit world, is people get siloed and they get very restrictive and concerned about their resources, concerned about their funders, it's a very competitive marketplace. Trader Joe's, when I was president there, when I brought them to the East Coast, our right to exist in Boston was defined by the customer. They walked in the front door, the marketplace determined, we're going to give you the right to exist because we're going to choose you over Stop and Shop for whatever reason, or Bread and Circuit, Whole Foods, or whatever. In other words, you are going to get because it's a voluntary exchange in a free marketplace, we're going to choose your product and some of your product over someone else. Turns out that the nonprofit world is every bit as competitive. And it's competitive on the funding front because it's limited dollars, and you've got to go out and show that I am worthy of your dollars. Now, it's also then competitive on the second side, so some people say it has two competitors, which is on the services being provided, making sure that recipient is worthy of it. I think that this issue is so huge. This issue, just nationally, let alone globally, but just nationally. And hunger in America is slightly different than it is in much of the rest of the world. Hunger here, as Mark said, the true face of a hungry person in America is an obese person, in many ways. So it is a challenge that it's one that, whether it's daily table that will grow. So we're doing a proof of concept store next year. We've already been speaking with some very large foundations that have said we don't do startups, but get one or two stores open, and if they do what you say they'll do, in other words, they can start to change people's eating habits and behaviors because now they can afford, which is, by the way, it's a big if, right? Because you're going to wean them off of salt, fat, and sugar, all very addictive, onto things that hopefully taste good, but more plant-based, nutrients, et cetera. If you can do that, and you can do it anything close to sustainable, then massive amounts of funding shouldn't be a problem. So it's really a question of, we've got to show that it works. We've got to learn from it. I'm certain whatever we do will end up not being, a perfect, and we'll end up learning a lot. And in the meantime, there are a lot of other really innovative things that are popping up. In the 3.5, 4 years I've been talking about this and exploring it, and that IRS, they actually were a 2.5-year process because they really questioned the retail model. They had some issues with that, which they then came around to, and they came to giving us our approval a couple of weeks ago, and which is why it was delayed. So
good.
Yeah.
So this young man right here.
Thank you. Does the panel have any ideas about the cultural attitudes about dumpster diving? In my community, I work with college students, and some of these kids I know they have plenty of money, and yet they love to raid the local grocery store dumpster and come home with pistachios that are past date and other nutritious foods. And yet I think there's hungry people in our community that feel a lot of stigma about going into those dumpsters. So I wonder if there's what the future of dumpster diving is in this context.
Do you want to start?
Yeah. I do want to start. I was recently told a story by a woman who said she used to go dumpster diving and take this really beautiful bread from behind a bakery, and she'd bring it into work every day. And one day, this coworker of hers, who was from Kerala, India, asked her, how do you afford to bring us this beautiful, freshly baked bread every day? And she said, oh no, I actually get it from behind the store. She said, oh, well, do the police know? And she said, no, I make sure to go when the police aren't there. And the coworker said, no, do the police know that they're throwing the bread away? And I feel like that is, dumpster diving, it's like a service and a disservice because it seems so radical and people aren't going to do it, and it makes this food waste lingo problem, it makes it seem like that's what we're talking about, and unless you actually do it and see how good that food is, it seems kind of, radical and gross and activist. So in that sense, I think it's a little bit of a disservice, but kind of when done well and right, and I don't have any problem with it. I think consumer action on this issue needs to be much broader than going through dumpsters. Mm-hmm. And actually, the amount of food that's in those dumpsters is a just minuscule part of the amount of food that's going to waste in the world. But there's a new documentary coming out called Just Eat It. That's not about dumpster diving per se, but it is about this topic, and I encourage you all to watch it because it's really well done.
Well, you mentioned the bread, and that reminds me, I think when Ron Shaikh from Panera took a break from Panera, they have it's actually a retail concept. There's several of them where the day-old or 2-day-old breads that they have, they sell. They basically give it away. It's in a shop format where you decide what you want to pay, right?
Panera Cares.
Panera Cares.
Yeah.
So that's another interesting way of dealing with bread, anyway.
I would say one thing about freegan or dumpster diving, which is a slight concern, is food safety.
Yeah.
And that's just one issue because I think that besides it kind of stigmatizing, that you've gone to a dumpster to get this stuff and that's where the stuff, there also are issues of just food safety because it's being exposed to, and often it's not refrigerated or stored. And I think that there's some concerns that I would have about that as an ex-retailer, and I don't think that's the answer here, is that everybody should, go collect things out of the dumpster. But I certainly understand why people feel the need to do that.
So there was a lady in green back here.
Hi. I understand that some donors, like restaurateurs or caterers, etc., are concerned about, calling food rescue organizations to donate leftover food because of lawsuits. And I heard in another conference that they should not be because I believe you're protected by law, that you cannot be sued. So perhaps, this fact should be communicated more to people who can donate to food rescue organizations such as City Harvest, they're safe. They won't be persecuted. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that topic, because there is federal protection, the 1996 Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and what it says is basically if you, as a producer of food, donate food that you believe to be in good shape, then you're protected from liability if you give that food in good faith and stand behind it. So what that means is when there's a will to donate, there's a way, and oftentimes retailers might be ignorant of that law, or maybe may choose to hide behind this well-accepted excuse that they would love to donate food, except, we don't want to be sued. And I'm always astounded by how many people buy that excuse, and it's total nonsense. I always push back on that by saying, can you give me an example of a lawsuit where someone who's been receiving food donations has turned around and figuratively bitten the hand that's feeding them? And I've yet to hear of such a case. And so for me, that's just exciting to hear, because that's a lot of food that we can harness.
And I was on a panel with Ben Simon, the founder of the Food Recovery Network, working with about 100 colleges. And he just shared what Jonathan just said. He said that, do you know the number of cases that have been brought regarding this are zero since 1996? Almost 20 years now, not one lawsuit has been brought.
Okay, I'm going to allow one more question, and I saw your hand go up first, so you get it. And then I'll let you all go to lunch, where you're going to clean your plates, right? Okay.
The issue that really drives me crazy on this is portion size in restaurants. It was alluded to a little earlier, but it is so disheartening to sit down in a restaurant, order carefully, or think you're ordering carefully, and then have them put twice as much in front of you as you can possibly eat. What can we do about that? Is anybody going after it?
Anybody in the restaurant business out
here?
Yeah.
It's a huge problem. And particularly when you're traveling and you haven't been to that restaurant before, you're just at a new restaurant, so you have no reference point. And just a fun statistic to throw out there is that the average cookie has quadrupled in calories since the 1980s, along with, Caesar chicken salads and other healthier items.
Yeah,
but
not too many unfinished cookies, though. For better or worse.
Keep on those cookies. I think, I recently heard about groups trying to start an app where you could find smaller plates, where restaurants would basically feature that they offer smaller portions. I think things like split plate charges and we're seeing the emergence of more of these small plate type of restaurants, or restaurants that offer, they kind of tell you, here's our smaller fare and here's our larger fare. And I think the more that restaurants can offer us a mix of options to fit our bellies is better. Others have gone to things like they've downsized what they're giving you, but they offer free refills on the potatoes on your breakfast platter or something like that. And that's another way to do it. And I think this is a great time to mention, we're really excited. Michael Pollan, I don't know if he's in the room right now.
He's eating your lunch.
We're excited that he just actually came out with a new food rule that is called Take Back Control of Your Plate. And it's really about portion sizes and how they're leading to so much waste. And kind of asking your restaurant, asking before you order, how big is this? And, can we share? And can you bring us an extra plate? And our homes as well, being careful about how much we're preparing if we're not big on leftovers, and just really kind of taking a little bit more control of what's being served to us. And it's going to take time.
And Dan, it's the marketplace that really drives this, I think. The retailers, restaurateurs, et cetera, often are an economic democracy. They're responding to our... I can't...
It's Ron.
Oh, hey, Ron.
Hey, buddy. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Ron, I got a real simple solution. Half portions. Yeah. Right? And I can tell you can go into any Panera in the country today and get anything as a half portion.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Great. That's great.
I think this goes back to what Ron was saying earlier about almost half portion. About kind of consumers needing to demand this. And when we look at this problem, our conclusion is that probably the most important place to start on this is with consumers, because to really affect this problem, which there's no silver bullet for. It's happening in so many places for so many different little reasons. It's gonna take a paradigm shift. And Jonathan has this great analogy that it's not okay to litter today. It's not okay to throw away an empty potato chip bag onto the sidewalk, but it's okay to throw a full one out in the garbage can. And we have the wrong paradigm here. And the police should be angry at that, bakery for throwing out that bread. And so we know that paradigm exists in other places. It used to exist more here, and I think we can get back to that. And one of the things we're doing at N.R.D.C. is we just secured a partnership with the Ad Council, the Advertising Council, which is the nonprofit arm of the ad industry, and we're gonna be launching a $90 million ad campaign over the next 3 years to try to raise awareness and shift the paradigm. And it's going to help, the idea is that not only will it change what we're doing in our homes, but also the environment that these businesses are operating in. And because, it needs to be okay for them to serve small portions. And right now we go into those restaurants and a lot of people want the bigger burrito. And if the guy next door is selling a smaller burrito, they're gonna go to the big burrito super guy, And so creating the social license for businesses to offer smaller portions, to be a little bit empty at 7:59 p.m. is part of the kind of paradigm shift and awareness that we need.
Yeah, and just to echo that sentiment, and that's well said, I think we need to change the conception of what value looks like. And so often today, it's just abundance. It's the number of calories or how big your burrito actually is. And that's what leads to the overeating and the waste. And so portion size is a nice way to actually combat two problems with one solution. And so obviously preventing the amount of excess we get on our plate is important. But if that does happen, I just wanted to give a quick plug for the noble practice of taking home leftovers and eating those leftovers because it doesn't do any good to save it and then throw it out 2 weeks later. And so when I think of food for tomorrow, the image that comes to mind is tonight's dinner that then becomes tomorrow's lunch.
Tupperware.
There you go.
Right.
And it's also, I think portion sizes go hand in hand with the public health concern around obesity. And there's only two things happening to those bigger portions. We're eating them or we're not. And so, Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign could be targeting that, and it will help the waste issue as well as.
So for all of you who are parents out there, it's okay to tell your children, think of the starving children in Africa to make them clean their plate. That's basically what you all are saying. Well, thank you all. Please thank our wonderful panelists.